Hello, Noel here. So, many years ago, during the COVID crisis, I found myself in a position where I could basically not afford to drink. So I started homebrewing, and I was making Kilyu, which is basically this lovely stuff. I was using a turbo yeast to get it to about 19 to 20%, and this has been stirred up a little bit. Usually that would all drop out as suspension. You'd be left with a slightly pale yellow clear liquid, and I was making it up in 25-litre batches of the stuff. The stuff was kind of nasty to drink, but it was fine for its purpose. It did its job. Mixing it with a soda stream and also adding flavouring eliminated most, but not all, of the horrible yeast flavour that is common to Kilyu, especially if you're making fast batches using our good old friend 48 turbo yeast. So I've been watching the internet and also the shelves at my local bottle shop, and I've noticed all these hard seltzers coming out, and I'm like, okay, yeah, so they're basically just cutting a neutral and putting, wait, no, they're brewing it? And I'm like, oh, they're making Kilyu, but better. So apparently these Norwegians, they come up with this fantastic stuff called Kvik, I think is the actual pronunciation. Correct me if I'm wrong, correct me in the comments. Kvik yeast, and that is basically, where did I put it? This stuff. This is a Voss strain, so that's a Mangrove Jacks one. I wanted to get Lutro because I've heard all sorts of crazy things about it. Apparently it has no trouble. I'm like, what? No yeast cake? What? But this stuff does have one, apparently. But yeah, so this stuff is basically made for the Australian climate, fast ferments, and produces incredibly clear, great tasting seltzer at a relatively high ABV percentage for what it is. This one will go up to 12% and an attenuation of about 80%. In a matter of less than a week. And I live in Australia. Today it got to about 26 to 27 degrees outside. Overnight it got down to about 12. So the only thing I need to worry about when I'm fermenting this stuff is sticking between its 20 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius range, apparently ideally at 32 degrees Celsius. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got one room in my house that gets really hot and it's hot all the bloody time. Yep. Basically all I need to do overnight is put a small heater on a thermostat. And I've never had the experience of where I actually have to brew something at a hotter heat than a cooler heat. It's mind-blowing, and apparently this stuff turns out really good. I've seen a lot of videos, not this specific strain of yeast, but overall Kvik yeasts in use for hard seltzers. So I do have a 25 kilogram bag of dextrose that I've got left over from that's been sitting in the corner of the house for like 3 years. And I thought I might do something with it, because that's a lot of cake. Oh my god. One reason why I was interested in making Kilyu and making hard seltzer to begin with is that alcohol is too expensive. For me to buy a bottle of vodka costs $40. All the ingredients that I've got for making this cost less than $30. It will make up 25 litres of 12%, highly drinkable. And as soon as I've broken that 4 litre mark, I've made my money back compared to buying a bottle of vodka. So why not? Tools you're going to need: fermenter. Got myself a new one today because my old ones are looking a bit tired. Water lock, mixing handle. Have you ever seen the movie The Euro Trip? Do you know what the safe word is? Pity the fool. You get mugged on the street, you pull out one of these things and a drill and they'll run away screaming. Should be part of the prison self-defense kit. Right, so if we're making a kveik, then nutrient. So the type of yeast that I got didn't have any nutrient, and the only nutrient that they had at the bottle shop was at the brewery store. I know. The only nutrient was one nutrient, which is DAP, which is basically diammonium phosphate, magnesium sulfate, magnesium carbonate, vitamins and trace minerals. You'd use a third of this 100-gram packet per 23 litres of low fruit and concentrate double wines rapid fermentation. I'd use about half that packet for a 25-litre batch of hard seltzer, just from like rough calculation in my head of how much nutrient it actually needs. Instead, what I'm going to do is use these expired Alcotech packets, which I have 2 of. I'm only going to use the one, obviously, but most of that is actually nutrient. There's very little yeast in here. If you wanted to make up a 25-litre batch of Kill You or Sugar Wash, you could get away with using 2 teaspoons of this stuff and then using 1 nutrient, and you could make this packet last for like 6 washes. There's more than enough nutrient in here, and because kveik, it's a Voss strain, 12%, it's more designed along the lines of making for like an ale or like a beer style yeast. It will be feeding off the nutrient in the stuff that you've added to make a wort. So you can't really go wrong with having too much nutrient. I mean, of course, there's probably a hard limit, but I think this packet, although more than what I need, it needs to be used, so I'm going to boil it up and use this in there as my yeast nutrient. And it shouldn't have as many horrible flavours that you get from the turbo yeast, because frankly it's mostly from the yeast pooping it out. And this particular yeast strain is what does that. The stuff that's in here will mostly just change the coloration a little bit, and might make it a little bit harder for me to get out. I'll just use bentonite clay, which is what I've always used with Kill You. That's how I clear Kill You. So it should work for hard seltzer. Alternatively, you could always go with a tomato paste wash. Simple, incredibly easy. I am so grateful that someone has come up with a strain that can handle the Australian heat. The other thing that you need to do is test your pH. It's most likely going to go low. Commercial breweries making hard seltzer recommend that you go high to start off with, so a pH of like 6. I'm just going to leave it and adjust with calcium carbonate as required, because I don't want to introduce more sulfur into it than I need to, using like a calcium sulfate. I'm not going to put any citric acid in it. What I am going to put in it, instead of citric acid, is mandarins. I'm going to get 3 of these mandarins, which are actually a really nice tasting variety called Honey Murcop. Cheapest best from your local Aldi. I'm going to put them in with the rind, crush them up a little bit, maybe 3 of them for the citric acid, and that should be enough to get this brew off to a fine start. And as long as my pH doesn't go too low, adjust this to keep it at about 5. It should be great. So that's basically everything. Now I've just got to get to sanitization, which is probably going to take a little bit. But anyway, through the magic of video editing, I will be back shortly with a pot on the boil.